So I found this and I like this, okay? Admittedly, this is the same thing that is on one that I had made myself and then one from sort of an older graduate level book. But what we're seeing here, guys, okay, is basically this whole thing is a muscle fiber. It's trying to show you guys, here's where glycolysis takes place. We're going to break down a molecule of glucose. Here's where glycolysis takes place. Okay. And here's what we're going to get from it. But then also, once we have made, and so this calls it pyruvic acid, that's pyruvate. Okay. Once we have done that, and then we have essentially reduced some electrons onto NADH, it shows you that we've got to be able to move the pyruvic acid into the mitochondria. You see it goes across both membranes. It's in here. Here's where the Krebs cycle takes place. The electrons may come all the way down here to the electron transport chain. Okay, so you guys can see in some ways in what I think of as sort of 3 dimensions how all of this is putting together. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, though, is rate control. Why, in some instances, is glycolysis going to make lactic acid? Why, in some instances, is that pyruvate going to be able to actually make it into the mitochondria? Okay. Why, when we exercise, is it going to speed up the rate of glycolysis? Is it going to speed up how we break down creatine phosphate? Okay. Things I wanted you guys to kind of look at a little bit with your assignment. I'll be interested to see what the answers to some of that are going to be. Okay, so I added this particular slide. I hope that's helpful. Okay, I hope it's helpful. All right, well, maybe it will let me advance. So, okay. So before we get into rate control, and I moved this around because I thought it was going to be better here than doing rate control, we do need to talk about how we break down fat. Okay. Fat is only broken down in aerobic metabolism. To understand, though, what goes into the Krebs cycle, we have to first understand, or at least review a little bit, of how does fat exist in your body? Okay? How are we storing it? If we were to look in your blood, what does it look like so that we can know what is going to be where and understand then what is going to be able to get taken out of the blood, put into a muscle cell. Okay, so you guys heard of triglycerides before? Y'all cover triglycerides like an intro to nutrition and these kinds of things. Okay, so when we break down stored fat in your body, maybe that's in subcutaneous adipose tissue, maybe it's in adipose tissue that surrounds a given organ. Maybe it's even in stored fat that exists. There's a little bit that exists inside of a muscle cell. Okay. When we break it down, we take a triglyceride and it undergoes a process called lipolysis. Lipolysis means to break down fat. Okay. When we break down a triglyceride, we get a molecule of glycerol and then 3 free fatty acids. Okay. I'm going to date myself here. Okay. None of you all were alive in the 90s, right? Anybody alive in the 90s? Cool. Great. So when I was a senior in college, a movie called The Matrix came out. Yes, you guys are aware of The Matrix? Yeah. Okay. Blew people's minds. We've never seen anything like that before, in addition to being very clever, but like all of those things. And we were learning about this in biochemistry. I was learning about triglycerides and things in biochemistry. And how many people have seen The Matrix? If I like stop and close my eyes, you guys, a few of you all have. Okay. That's okay. So in the movie, there are these sort of like sentinel-looking things, and they look like what I always thought, kind of like an octopus in some ways. It's like a robot, and it has like this kind of flowing like arm things. And for whatever reason, I saw those at the time we were thinking about triglycerides, and that's always what I've had in my mind. This is what a triglyceride is. Floating around in your blood, basically, are these things. But it's this glycerol, which is kind of a structural piece, and then off of the glycerol are these 3 chains of fatty acids. Okay, so you guys can think about it in that way. It's kind of like a 3-armed octopus or something. Okay, and we break the triglycerides down, and then the glycerol and the free fatty acids need to go somewhere because those are the things that we can actually break down in the foods. Okay, especially the free fatty acid. We can break the glycerol down, but it's the free fatty acid because of these long chains of carbons. Okay, that's where all the energy is going. So we break them down, all right, and we're going to use some enzymes, okay, that are called lipase, L-I-P-A-S-E. A lipase enzyme is what breaks down fat. Right? When you haven't eaten a meal for a while, okay, or if you haven't had breakfast, lipase enzyme activity is elevated in you guys, right? When you go to exercise, lipase enzyme activity increases, driven by epinephrine, norepinephrine, okay, glucagon, cortisol, those types of things. Okay, one of the things that happens is that exercise stimulates the enzyme that breaks the triglycerides down, so we have more fat available in the blood. Okay, now other kinds of fats and things that could conceivably be broken down but are less so. You know, phospholipids, these are the things that are going to exist in cell membranes. And you guys have heard of cholesterol, right? So what cholesterol is? Okay. We also have cholesterol. So the big take home is we break this down. We have this giant storage site for all of this energy. When we break it down, most of the fat in your body is not inside of your muscle cells where it needs to be. It's in adipose tissue, or it's something from the food that you just ate. So our big problem then is we break it down, we put it into the bloodstream. You guys ever put fat in water? What happens when you try to put fat in water? It floats up. Okay? As part of my postdoc, we made people basically they were taking ginger pills, and to facilitate its breakdown, we had them take it with some olive oil. And we would give them 2 options. You could just do a shot of olive oil, okay? Or we would do the ridiculous thing where it was like a magic trick of dump the shot of olive oil into a little bit of water and act like we were trying to, you know, like swoosh it around, and of course it doesn't do anything. It just floats up to the top, and then you can take it with all of that, okay? So because fats are hydrophobic, they don't like to be in water. We cannot carry fat by itself in your blood. Okay? And so this is one of the important parts of this step of being able to use fat in the metabolic state. We break it down, we have to transport it in your blood so we can get it to the cells that need it. It has to be bound onto some things, okay? Transport proteins most of the time in order to be able to move. And so one of the things that are going to happen with all of that, okay, is I'm going to show you guys in the slide after this, there's a couple of proteins, okay? There's a thing called albumin, which is a giant protein that binds it. And then potentially from a cholesterol standpoint, this is what you guys think of as a thing called a lipoprotein lipase. Sorry, that's my brain not working. Oh deal, high density lipids. Anyway, I'll get there. So, what we were talking about basically are the first 2 steps in this use of fat management. Right. Sometimes this whole process is called beta oxidation. That's technically not correct. Okay, beta oxidation is actually one step in all of this. It's like down here, it's the very, very last step is beta oxidation. But you may oftentimes hear the process of fat breakdown referred to as beta oxidation. Okay, but we have lipolysis, we break it down, we have our adipose tissue, it's our lipase enzyme. We have to then release it into the blood and transport it. Then once it's in the blood, we have to move it into the muscle. Once it gets into the muscle, we have to then couple our individual free fatty acids with coenzyme A, just like we do with pyruvate, move it into the mitochondria, and then once it's into the mitochondria, we start taking 2 carbons at a time off of our free fatty acids. Okay? These things may have 18 carbons, or 16 carbons, or 14 carbons. Okay? This is the general process. Talk about the lipase enzyme, and then we'll get into this other enzyme down here, where we move back into the mitochondria. It uses an enzyme called carnitine transferase. So I put the enzymes on here because these are again going to be places where we can help kind of control the rate at which all of this happens. Okay. So this is that entire process. Just sort of I put the numbers on here to denote the individual steps. Okay. And so what you can see at the very, very top, guys, the very, very top is the inside of a blood vessel. So in the blood vessel on the left side, you can see there's glucose, and you can see how glucose would come down and make it into the Krebs cycle. Okay. But then on the right, you've got free fatty acids, and those free fatty acids are going to be bound most likely onto albumin, just this giant protein that's going to help carry it into fat around. We break it out of that adipose tissue, it ends up in the blood vessel. Okay, it's transported in the blood, and then once it's transported, it arrives at the muscle cells. Okay, and we have to bring it in. All of this stuff, all of this alphabet soup in here, you guys are not responsible for. Okay, you're not responsible for it. I couldn't find a lot better of a way to look at all of this. But what happens essentially is we bring the free fatty acids in, okay? It enters into my muscle cell, and then you guys can see down here at the very kind of outside of the mitochondria, we couple the free fatty acids onto coenzyme A, okay? It then moves itself through here using carnitine. It moves itself from in the interstitial space into the mitochondria, and then we start pulling off basically 2 carbons at a time. So this step is technically called metabolism. Those 2 carbon molecules, the acetyl groups are bound to CoA, and then they enter into the Krebs cycle just like a molecule. Okay. So 2 things to understand about this. 1, we get a huge amount of energy. Okay, because there's basically you're going to end up with 2 molecules of pyruvate. You're going to end up with 2 acetyl-CoAs from a glucose molecule that will go in. Okay. With fat, if there's maybe 16 or 18 carbons, okay, then you may have 8 or 9 acetyl-CoAs. They're going to be able to enter here. So we can make a tremendous amount more energy even from fat than we can from glucose. But it's slow. Okay. Primarily, it's slow for 2 reasons. 1, there's a lot of steps. Okay, there's a lot of steps to break down glucose stuff. The big issue why it's slow is that it's slow for us to break down and get the free fatty acids out of your adipose tissue. Okay, to get it out of adipose tissue. That process takes time. During exercise, generally, it takes 30 to 45 minutes to adequately stimulate the lipase enzymes, begin to break down fat, and get a meaningful increase in free fatty acids in the bloodstream, where it will shift where we're getting energy from. Okay? The longer that you exercise, the greater the proportion of your energy is going to come from fat, because it just takes longer. It takes longer for us to break. Okay? So just know we break fat down, put it into the blood, put it into the muscle cell, couple it to CoA, put it into the mitochondria, pull off 2 carbons at a time. And that's all that I want you guys to know. Okay? Free fatty acid goes in, really goes in as an acetyl-CoA, and then we're going to go through this, okay, however many times, take the number of carbons in your fat, divide it by 2. This. Okay? So we get lots of energy. It's slow, but we get lots of energy. Okay. All right. So the big issue with all of this, and the reason that I said that it's slower and the place we're going to regulate all of this is essentially at free fatty acid delivery from adipose tissue into the muscle. And this is primarily regulated by how fast we can break it down, okay? How fast we can break it down in adipose tissue, and then blood flow to our muscles. Blood flow to muscles is usually pretty high. That's not going to be a problem. So it's really about this, okay? Who hasn't had breakfast? You guys have not had breakfast. You all went to exercise right now. You would derive a greater proportion of your energy during that bout of exercise of fat than somebody that did have breakfast. Okay? Has ever heard it's sort of a myth, and in some other ways it's kind of a misconception. Do cardio in the morning if you want to burn more fat. Do cardio while you're fasting, right? You've not eaten anything. Part of the reason is that because you haven't eaten overnight, we've already done some lipolysis. We've already stimulated those lipase enzymes, and so people will have all of that. Okay? The other way, if you want to burn more fat during exercise, is just eat some fat before exercise. Okay? Now, that doesn't really get us to the same place necessarily that a lot of people may want. People may want to try to use exercise to use adipose tissue. That's your thing, great. Okay, but that's going to be one of the places here. Don't worry about HSL stands for hormone sensitive lipase. ATGL is adipose tissue lipase. It's going to go on there. Don't worry about what these are, but they're two different enzymes. The hormone one is activated by epinephrine and norepinephrine. But just know there's a lipase enzyme that regulates the primary breakdown in those sites. And then in the muscle, we're going to regulate how all of this works by our ability to take it in. Okay, do we have enough transport proteins? Generally, yes. And then the big issue is going to be how do we move it across and into our mitochondria? And that's where that carnitine transferase enzyme comes into mind. Don't worry about what I have on the other sort of alphabet soup stuff. That's going to be okay. It's really, really simple. We regulate it by going into the muscle itself and then into the mitochondria. Okay. Okay. So I like this particular graph because it shows concept that I want to get across that really, really well. Okay. Over time, you use more at any given intensity. Over time, you use more fat. The other thing that comes into play is exercise intensity. Okay. So here's percentage of VO2 max, so percentage of maximal sort of aerobic capacity. 45% somewhere down here is walking. 90, 95, 100% over here. You're sort of running as fast as you can for as long as you can. Okay. You can see here sort of in the middle from about 55 to about 75% of VO2. We're going to have a relatively constant amount of fat right there. Relatively constant amount of fat use for energy. But as we clear about 75% or thereabouts, our use of fat during exercise, as intensity rises, our use of fat as an energy substrate is going to fall. Okay, it's going to fall. This happens for two reasons. Okay, one, fat breakdown is slow. Energy demand is high, fat breakdown is slow, so it's hard for us to meet those two things. Hard to meet them. The other piece of this is, and that goes back to the previous slide, is as this goes up and up, we're above lactate threshold. Lactate threshold, probably somewhere in this region for most people. Okay, we're above lactate threshold. As pH drops and we become acidic, it actually inhibits the ability to move the free fatty acids into the mitochondria. So we begin to lose that ability to have those things happen. Okay? But the takeaway from all of this, takeaway very, very simply, what I want you to know is as we increase exercise intensity towards 100% of VO2 max, our use of fat as an energy substrate falls. Okay? At any given intensity, the longer you go, fat use goes up. And then on the other side as intensity increases, fat use will fall. Okay? Many of you lift weights before you go run or bike? You? Okay. They're all like, not today, not tomorrow. Okay, guys, why do you lift weights before you do that? Convenience, okay?
So you don't burn out all your energy.
So I don't burn out all of my energy.
Like if you do the cardio before, more tired.
Okay. And you care more about the lifting weights. No, that's a very valid thing. Okay. If you lift weights beforehand, while you lift weights, epinephrine and norepinephrine go up. You lift weights and then you go do your cardio. When you're doing your cardio, you burn more fat than you would have otherwise. Now you may not be able to go as long or at as high of intensity because you've already depleted glycogen and fatigued yourself from doing the weights. That's the other thing. Okay? Maybe the single most terrible thing we ever did when I was a grad student was did a bunch of weights and then went and rode the bike for an hour and a half in an effort to try to look at what if we could basically shift this curve. Okay, if we did, so we did 4 sets of 10 with your 10 rep max of squats, then single leg hack squats, then knee extension with each leg. We did something else too. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was awful. And then we went and rode the bike at what was supposed to be 65% of VO2 max for an hour and a half. Okay? In an effort to try to demonstrate, could we shift the way this curve looks? Could we show that if you do weights first, you get this big sort of hormone response from that? Could we lower basically the amount of carbs that we're eating to just raise the amount of fat? And the answer was yes. We were very successful at that. It's awful. It's just absolutely fucking terrible. Never seen anything like this in my life. We did it once. We decided it was so bad that we couldn't ask anybody to do it. Okay. This is a new version of the same slide that was in there. This is called a crossover graph. Okay, it's called the crossover graph. Let me try to show you guys what all is happening here. Okay, what the graph shows is we've got carbohydrate use for energy during exercise in the blue, and then kind of in the kind of seafoamy greeny blue here, we've got fat. All right. And then on this axis, we have percentage of VO2 max. So we've basically got rest, walking fast, jogging, okay, brisk jogging, jogging very fast, running really close to all out, okay? And so what you can see from this is at rest, you derive more energy from fat than you do from carbohydrates. Energy demand is low, so there's plenty of time for that entire process of using fat to be able to generate that huge amount of energy. We're doing fine. But what you can see essentially, this just demonstrates, you will know as I go to walking, jogging, and so forth, fat use falls, carb use rises. So if I'm not using fat, then I'm going to use carbohydrates either by making lactic acid or I'm going to put the carbohydrates into the chromosome. Okay. This point right here in the middle, and it's going to occur in different places of people. This is called the crossover point. All the crossover point shows is there is some exercise intensity at which you go from deriving more energy from fat than carbs, and it switches and you start to get more from carbs than fat. Okay. That's what this shows. This graph and this concept has been traditionally used by bodybuilders to say that if they want, when they're trying to cut, okay, after they've done their dirty bulk sessions for like 2 months and then got as big as they can, and then they want to try to cut weight and cut body fat, to say, I want to burn more fat during exercise, don't run, walk. Right? I want to do all of this, I should walk. Technically, that's a correct thing, but you just can't go very far in a given amount of time when you walk. So your overall caloric expenditure isn't very, very high. But that's what this is showing. Okay. As kind of like in the last graph is showing this kind of decline in fat use, but there's going to be a corresponding increase in carbohydrate use. Okay. Good and simple. No. Okay. Good deal. All right. So the last few slides, we're going to talk about how we control the rate of metabolism. Okay. How do we control the rate? So what we get from this, remember, all of your energy pathways are active all the time. Okay? They're all active all the time. The predominant pathway is going to be the one where you derive the most energy, okay? And that is going to depend upon what is the energy demand of your bout of exercise. And then at what speed, basically, and what is the overall energy yield? What's the combination of speed and yield for each individual path? Okay? You're resting right now, you don't need that much energy. Okay? You don't need that much energy. Generally at rest, aerobic metabolism is the predominant pathway because it makes a lot of energy. Even though it's relatively slow, it can meet your demand without us having to use the other. Okay? It always helps me in this instance to think that the body does not care where its ATP comes from. It doesn't make any sort of judgment on this is better than this. All your cells know is we need ATP. Okay? Get us ATP to meet whatever that demand is. And so it will use ATP from wherever it needs to meet that immediate demand. So now demand is low. You're able to make plenty through aerobic metabolism to meet that demand. Okay? As we transition from rest to exercise, to walking, to jogging, to running, from rest to lifting weights or whatever that your exercise preference is, demand goes up. Okay? So as demand goes up, at some point, that demand is going to likely exceed what resting aerobic metabolism from a speed standpoint and a magnitude standpoint can provide. Okay? It's going to exceed what it can provide. So it's going to have to start getting energy from some other places. Doesn't care where, but it's going to need it from some other places. And because it needs it right now, the most likely places when we're short from an aerobic standpoint is to pull from those immediate sources and then to pull from glycolysis. Okay? Now, every pathway has some key sort of rate control step. And it's that rate control step that we're going to want to examine and look at as to why is aerobic metabolism slow? Why can it speed up a little bit, but why can it never go any faster than that? Why is the creatine phosphate one? Why is it so fast? Right. So it's all about these rate control steps. Okay. But just remember, it's about supply and demand. We talked about speed. We've done this until we're sort of blue in the face. Creatine phosphate, those immediate pathways are the fastest. They have very active enzymes, and they're one step. 1 second. Glycolysis is next, followed then by aerobic or our making of what we're calling oxidative phosphate, calling all the way through the electron transport chain. Okay. So if we look at simply starting off with our really fast pathways, what is it that speeds them up? What is it that drives them to say, hey, now we need to start breaking down creatine phosphate? You're breaking down very little right now. Okay. And the big reason is that right now at rest, the ADP levels in your cells are relatively low. Aerobic metabolism meets demand. Okay. There's not a lot of free ADP that's floating around. As that demand begins to exceed what aerobic metabolism can do, then ADP levels rise. As they rise, ADP interacts with creatine phosphate and creatine kinase enzyme and it drives this reaction to make ATP. Okay? The reaction is stimulated by ADP. That's the primary thing. Okay? Its rate control is just how much creatine phosphate is there, how much creatine kinase in there is there, how much ADP. It's just a combination of those three things. Okay? As ADP rises, the reaction just goes. Okay? Typically with creatine phosphate, we utilize it as ADP levels stay high until it's gone. Okay? So if I'm here and I start doing squats, right, I'm resting, I'm good. My ADP level is low. I start doing squats, squatting. At some point, I may do enough that demand exceeds what aerobic metabolism can supply. ADP levels begin to rise, and I immediately start using creatine phosphate. Okay? Generally, when you go from rest to exercise, that happens in the first few seconds. Okay? It happens in the first few seconds. This is what's going to drive us. Okay. Now let's talk about glycolysis. Okay. So demand is increasing. Okay. We're using up our immediate pathways. While that is happening, some things are also happening in glycolysis. Okay. So I have put on there 4 enzymes that are important in regulating glycolysis. Okay. One of those is the very first enzyme as the glucose moves in. It's called phosphorylase. The second enzyme is the actual rate-limiting step. That's phosphofructokinase or PFK. And then the next slide, there's the 2 enzymes that control where pyruvate goes. Okay. Lactate dehydrogenase or pyruvate dehydrogenase. So what I want to show you guys on the first 2 enzymes, okay, is a thing that's very common from a biochemical standpoint. Many enzymes are what we call allosteric. Okay. And so an allosteric enzyme is an enzyme that, when it binds certain things, can either work better or it can work worse. Okay. It can work better or it can work worse. That's really, really important in how we regulate how much glycolysis is going to happen. Okay. So remember, phosphorylase. Oh no, I apologize. We didn't even talk about glycogen to glucose. But phosphorylase is the enzyme that breaks glycogen down. I'm not with it this morning. We had family here this weekend. We're gonna have to buy Ellis a dog now. My wife's cousin brought her 2 little dogs, and Ellis spent 2 days carrying the one dog around. Like literally, the dog is like as big as she is, and she just carried it around. And so I didn't sleep a whole lot. I'm kind of behind. But being allosteric, calcium, AMP and ADP, and then epinephrine and norepinephrine. All things that increase with exercise or with muscle contractions. Okay? All of these things go up. It activates phosphorylase. Phosphorylase will then begin to break down more and more glycogen into glucose. So what we're doing now with this enzyme is we're breaking the glycogen down so there's more glucose available in the cell in order to put through glycolysis. Okay? So while I'm doing my squats, while I'm doing this, while I'm beginning to use creatine phosphate, calcium is getting released during every muscle contraction. There's epinephrine and norepinephrine beginning to get released with every contraction. Okay. ADP levels are rising. That's what's driving the creatine phosphate. All of those things are working in concert to activate phosphorylase. So while I'm exercising, I am beginning to stimulate that enzyme. I'm beginning to break down glycogen in my muscles to have glucose to begin to feed into glycolysis, just in case I need to keep exercising longer than what's happening. That's one of the things that goes on there. A similar thing happens in glycolysis at that 3rd step with phosphofructose kinase. Okay? We basically crank up or down the rate of PFK depending upon what the metabolic rate is at any given point in time. When you have ATP, when you have creatine phosphate levels that are high, this is generally rest. PFK is sort of inhibited. It's going to be slow. Okay. As ADP and AMP in an organic phosphate begin to rise, PFK speeds up. So the combination is more glucose from glycogen to be available to be used in glycolysis. Plus, this step begins to speed up, so more of this glucose can actually go through, and we're raising the kind of front end rate on glycolysis. Now, I want you guys to take one look at this right here. Okay? One of the reasons that just simply using glycolysis to make energy can lead us to a problem is that we make lactic acid and pH goes down. We become acidic. There's more hydrogen ions floating around. Hydrogen inhibits PFK. So this is one of the reasons that as you make a lot of lactic acid, that metabolism is going to eventually shut off. Because hydrogen inhibits PFK. So you cannot continue to put more and more glucose through it. So eventually this will get shut down, or it will go very, very slow. We can't make enough energy. Okay. Okay. So we put the glucose in, gone through with PFK, we've made our pyruvate. Okay. As you're exercising, this is going to get ramped up. Okay. We're making more and more and more pyruvate. This is good. Okay. We're making some energy. But in order to make even more energy, what we need to be able to do is take that pyruvate, use pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme, put it into the mitochondria. Okay. Converse is that pyruvate will be broken down by lactate dehydrogenase, and then we start that whole pathway over again. We make lactic acid, we become acidic, we made a couple, 2 to 3 ATP, we continue to kind of run all of this, but we're making this. If we can get down here, we can make 32, 34, however many more ATP we need, way, way more. Okay. So the other place that all of this is going to get controlled is by the kind of ratio of activation between LDH and PDH. Okay. People that have more PDH, if they have more mitochondria, you can stick more pyruvate into your mitochondria. People that have more fast switch muscle fibers have a more active LDH enzyme, and so more things are going to want to go in that particular direction. Okay. So we are using our first two to control how much glucose gets in and moves through to pyruvate, and then we use these two enzymes basically. We want PDH to be the one, or the pyruvate is going to come into contact with the water. Okay. So that's how we control glycolysis. So all of this is happening while I'm starting to do this. I'm squatting, okay. I'm beginning to break down glycogen, I'm speeding up PDH, PFK, what am I? Speeding up PFK. Then I want all of that pyruvate, hopefully to come into contact with pyruvate. Don't make lactic acid, put it into the mitochondria, make more energy, make no hydrogen. Okay. Okay. So this is just going to kind of show what we've just talked about. But what I want to focus on is the part at the very, very bottom. Okay. The key issues and the key problem with glycolysis is making too much lactic acid, and that is going to limit how long you can exercise. There are really two instances when this happens, so we need to be kind of aware of. Okay. The first time we tend to make more lactic acid than we might like or we might need to, based upon energy demand, is at the onset of exercise. Anybody ever gone for a run? The first couple of minutes you feel terrible, and then 3 or 4 minutes in or 5 minutes in, you begin to feel like it's a little better, right? You're running the exact same pace, right? The exact same amount of time, and you just feel worse at the very, very start. Okay. Part of that is at the onset of exercise, our aerobic metabolic pathways are at their slowest unless you've done a warm-up. Okay. They're at their slowest, and so the glycolytic side is going to tend to be a little bit higher. You feel worse at the onset of exercise because you're making more lactic acid. Okay. The other time when this is going to be a bit of a problem is when you do high intensity exercise. When there's so much pyruvate being made, okay? There's so much pyruvate being made that it's going to exceed the capacity of PDH to put it into the mitochondria. There's so much pyruvate, it is by necessity going to come into contact with that LDH enzyme. And you're going to start making more and more lactic acid. And that will eventually then inhibit PFK and shut the whole thing. Okay? So those are the two times when things are going to be really going to be sort of a problem. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about Krebs cycle electron transport chain control. Okay. So electron transport chain basically is controlled by ADP. Just like the other things. As ADP levels rise, the electron transport chain will speed up. Okay. So at rest, electron transport chain is, when I say that it's largely inhibited, it's just kind of operating at its slowest rate. Okay. As this begins to speed up and we do more and more, we need more and more oxygen on the back. That's why we measure oxygen use as a demarcation of, or a measure of how we're gonna measure all of this. Okay. So electron transport chain is controlled by ADP. For the most part, the Krebs cycle is pretty fast. It is controlled by by proxy by the electron transport chain. Because we need NAD and FAD to be able to move back up to the Krebs cycle, donate their electrons here, and then be free so that they can come back and collect things there. So in a lot of ways, Krebs is really controlled by electron transport chain activity. Okay. So essentially, as ADP levels are going to rise, this electron transport chain speeds up, so the Krebs is going to speed up. When we're kind of at rest, we have lots of ATP, okay, and a reasonable amount of NADH that's around. Electron transport chain is going to be pretty slow. The Krebs is going to be pretty slow. Of these two, it's the electron transport chain that's really going to be the kind of rate limiting spot. Okay, that's the rate limiting spot. Okay. So each pathway, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, and glycolysis can all go faster than they are at rest. That's good. Okay. It takes a little bit of time, though, for all of the various things that make those enzymes work faster to be able to. That's why start of exercise, we're going to use creatine phosphate, we're going to use our immediate source because it takes a little bit of time to be able to increase the way those things are going to work. Okay. So let's talk about oxygen use stuff. All right. In general, at sea level or kind of wherever we are, as long as we're not like way up with this, where there's a lack of oxygen, exercise is very, 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 very rarely ever limited by a lack of oxygen. Okay? By a lack of oxygen. Now, if I put a blood pressure cuff on your arm and I have you exercise, well, there's not going to get blood flow. You're going to fatigue faster because there is no oxygen. That's a real thing. But in most people, most of the time, even if you're breathing heavy and you feel like you can't bring in enough air and all of that, that's a pulmonary issue. It's not, you're not having to stop because of the lack of oxygen. Okay. Maybe at maximal levels, maybe you're slightly limited by oxygen, but in general, we're really, really good at doing all of this. Okay? That's going to be good. So don't fall into that particular misconception. You guys see the people that wear the Bane mask, the little breathing restricting mask in the gym? You guys seen those? Does not simulate altitude. Okay. They used to sell them as simulating altitude. It simulates having emphysema or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That's what it does. You can't get enough air in. So you wear one and you go exercise, and you actually can't work out as hard as you could before, because in that instance, you are limiting pulmonary function and limiting oxygen coming in. Okay? You'll fatigue faster. You can use it to train your diaphragm, to train your breathing muscles. That's a potentially reasonable thing. But it's been a minute since I've been able to actually go and work out. But there was a couple of summers ago, there was a guy that was always wearing his in the hub when I was over there. And I would see him like lifting weights with it and all of these things. I mean, it's fine, whatever. But I was wanting to ask, like, what exactly are you wearing? Like, what are you hoping to gain from whatever this thing is going to be? So that's what goes on here. The last 2 points don't necessarily fit with these top 2 points, but I want to, and we'll get into this more when we do aerobic, but I want to point this out. Okay. The single best way to derive more energy from aerobic metabolism, to make less lactic acid, okay, is to simply have more mitochondria in your muscle fibers. You have more mitochondria, you have more PDH. So any pyruvate molecule has a greater chance of bumping into PDH. If you have more mitochondria, there's more places you have more electron transport chain, more Krebs cycle. There's more mitochondria, there's more of those. There's a greater place to be able to break down fat, greater chance that fat will go in, and a greater chance that the glucose will go in. And then you make plenty of energy that way, and so therefore you will have to use less creatine phosphate at any given exercise. You will make less lactic acid. So the way you get more mitochondria is run or bike. You have to train yourself. That's one of the primary adaptations, okay, from exercise. Is that it makes mitochondrial numbers go up. And that's a big deal. If you want to metabolize more fat, don't get up and go exercise in the morning when you haven't eaten. If you want to metabolize more fat, be a runner or a cyclist. Okay? Have more mitochondria. People that are have a better functioning aerobic metabolism metabolize more fat. Okay? That's the big thing. So we'll cover more of that when we get to aerobic training. That's going to be the other big piece of all of this. Okay? If I want to control where the glucose or where the pyruvate goes, I need more of this so that more pyruvate will bind to this rather than here. And the way I get this is to have more mitochondria. If I want to break down more fat for energy, I need more of the things, mitochondria, where the fat can actually be broken down. Okay. So I found this. I'm previewing a book. How would you guys feel if I had to sign a book? Y'all care? Not for you guys. So like we get all these book reps that come to see us, and they want it. Like there are many exercise physiology textbooks. I chose not to even put one out there for you guys as like, hey, you should buy this book for class, because I have no intentions to ever directly teach out of the book. But I have been given a bunch of stuff from a new book, and so I was looking through all their PowerPoint slides, and I found this, and I thought this was a useful thing. And so it shows the pathway. So creatine phosphate, glycolysis, they're calling it citric acid cycle. This is Krebs here, electron transport chain. It talks about the actual rate limiting enzyme. It talks about the things that stimulate those pathways, and it shows the things that inhibit them. I want to point out, what is the common thing that stimulates metabolism? It's ADP. What is the common thing that inhibits metabolism? It's ATP. When you have enough ATP, like most of you guys do at rest, everything runs pretty slow. As soon as you start doing anything else where energy demand goes up, ADP levels rise, and it drives every one of our pathways to begin to speed themselves up. Okay? You need to know these two enzymes, creatine kinase and phosphofructokinase. You do not have to know these two down here. You don't have to know the rate limiting enzymes in the Krebs cycle or the electron transport chain. They're not responsible. Just these two. Okay. Okay. The very last thing, and then we can talk our way through a couple of stuff before we go. I really like this chart as well. What this is trying to show you guys is basically time. Okay. Exercise time. And the relative percentage of energy that we get from sort of collectively anaerobic pathways, so ATP, creatine phosphate, myokinase, glycolysis where we make lactic acid, versus aerobic. Okay. So this shows theory. 10 seconds, like a sprint. 10 seconds, 90% anaerobic, mostly creatine phosphate. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, the big takeaway, right, is as we move longer and longer, a larger and larger percentage of our energy use comes from aerobic metabolism. Okay? The other piece of this, though, is energy demand. If you're going as fast as you can for 10 seconds, or 30 seconds, or 60 seconds, energy demand is much higher in the short-term ones versus what you could actually maintain for, say, 30 minutes, or 90 minutes, or 2 hours, or 4 hours, or something like that. Okay, so that's the other piece to keep in mind. But you got to look at this. Corresponding on the right side of the graph, or the right side of the cartoon, is it's going to show the same things, but it's going to show you example activities. Okay, 100-meter swim, soccer, okay, baseball, basketball, football. These things where you go really quickly and then you get to rest while you're doing stuff, mostly anaerobic. As we move down, right, rowing for say 2,000 meters, 400-meter swim, these things are going to be down here. We're going to see, say, a 1,500-meter run, so running about a mile or thereabouts, it's about 70-30. Okay, 2-mile run, 10,000 meters or something like that. So that's going to be about 6 miles or thereabouts. As we move down foot of that, you're going to see much more endurance type events. Okay, so this could be something where I may ask you guys a couple of questions on the test about, like, hey, if we did, right, pick between certain activities, which one is more likely to be predominantly an anaerobic activity versus, say, an aerobic activity? Okay, and vice versa. Okay. And mostly it's about if it takes a long period of time with constant use to do something, it's going to be more aerobic. Okay. And that's metabolism. Okay. You guys think you can know what goes in and what comes out of every pathway? Many of you all do not look very confident in that particular thing. What goes in, just go through it. Write it down. I promise this will be on the test. What goes in to the creatine phosphate pathway? On a trick question, what goes in? Creatine phosphate. Good. What enzyme drives the reaction? Okay. Creatine phosphate goes in. Creatine kinase drives the reaction. What comes out? ATP and creatine. Boom. Good. Okay. Simple. I likely won't ask much of the question, but what goes into the myokinase reaction? 2 ADP molecules. Enzyme is myokinase. Then what comes out? ATP and AMP. Very good. Okay. 2 molecules of ADP go in. 1 molecule of ATP and 1 molecule of AMP come out. What goes into glycolysis? Glucose. Some carbohydrate, right? Glucose goes in, let's just say. What comes out of glucose? What comes out of glycolysis? Okay? Right, the answer should be, well, Dr. Black, it depends. Right? Generally, okay, glucose goes in, we get pyruvate at the end. Technically, we should say we get lactic acid. We're going to say pyruvate. Okay? What do I get in addition to that pyruvate? Maybe 2 ATPs. Might it be more than that? 2 or 3. What determines the 2 or 3? Got a lot of mumbling. Okay, it's from glycogen or blood glucose. Okay, good. So glucose in, pyruvate out. I make 2 or 3. What else do I make? I'm making how many NADH? 2. I make 2 NADH. Okay. Very good. Now, in some instances, right, that pyruvate gets turned into lactic acid. If it gets turned into lactic acid, what happens to my NADH? It gets recycled, right? We put the electrons back on. So those electrons cannot go to the electron transport. So when I go from glucose to pyruvate to lactic acid, I make my 2 or my 3 ATP, and that's it. If that pyruvate goes into the Krebs cycle, though, right? Pyruvate into Krebs, I make what? I make acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is what really goes into Krebs, and I make a bunch of NADH and FADH, and I make a couple of ATP. Right? Okay. That's the big deal. What about fat? Where do I put fat in? Which metabolic pathway can break down fat? Okay, it is called beta oxidation. Which pathway is that? It's not glycolysis. The oxidative pathway, right? So the substrate for the Krebs cycle could be acetyl-CoA from pyruvate, or it could be acetyl-CoA from fat. Okay? So then its regulation is basically going to be the same. I got to get the fat out of adipose tissue, get it into the blood, get it into my cell, get it into the mitochondria, and then it gets broken down. Okay? That's the key takeaway. Okay? Let me give you the key takeaway. How'd you guys do with that on the time? Okay. So I have multiple questions on the assignment. And it raises some things to me. And I don't always know how to sort of go about this. And so what we can do from this is let you guys ask questions now. So part of the time when I give you an assignment, when I ask you a question, I know the answer is not explicitly written on a slide. Several of you will email and be like, I can't find this, I don't know where it is. I know that's the point in some of this. Is that you don't have to go and Google anything. But I'm trying to see, can you take information from some other slides and kind of make some inferences on what all would happen? And I know that's frustrating. I know that seems like I haven't taught you this. I know it seems like this isn't fair. Okay, I get that. I know that going in, and I want you guys to know that I'm aware of all of that. That's why we do it to practice a little bit. Okay. So when I ask a question that is like, what is it about exercise that makes all of our metabolic pathways speed up? And I haven't explicitly said on a slide, here's because I got about 10 questions about this. Okay, which is great. I'm glad you guys are asking. I appreciate that. What is it about exercise that makes the metabolic pathways speed up? It drives this, right? Because energy demand goes up. We have to increase all of the function of all of our pathways to try to meet that. What's the big thing? What do you guys think? What's the thing about exercise that drives the pathways to speed up? Okay, what's happening in the CrossFit side? Using up ATP. Okay. The big thing that goes on with exercise is it makes CrossFit cycle turns ATP into ADP, and the ADP will stimulate every one of our pathways. Okay, that's the big thing. So when you do more CrossFit cycle, more force repeatedly, more ADP, and it's going to rise. Okay. Now, there's some more things that go on that are a little bit beyond the scope of our class that we cover in the graduate class. The other thing that happens is calcium, right? As you release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, so excitation, contraction, coupling is so important. Calcium stimulates the breakdown of fat. Calcium stimulates the breakdown of glycogen. Calcium stimulates, also kind of stimulates PFK. But the big thing is it's ADP. Okay? So there is this feed forward mechanism that is in place. As you break down more ATP, the thing that it becomes stimulates all of the metabolic pathways so we can turn the ADP back into ATP. Okay? So that is how the system is going to be set up. That's how the system, quote unquote, knows to begin to break down creatine phosphate, increase glycolysis, increase Krebs cycle on the electron transport chain. It's mostly because of a rise in ADP levels. Because what the body is trying to do is to match and provide a match with ATP being made to the ATP that's being broken down in the Krebs cycle, in the CrossFit cycle, in order for us to generate force. Okay? That's the answer to that particular question. That's why it's regulated the way that it is. Okay? That's that level of critical thinking that I want to challenge you guys with before we talk about all of it in that particular one. Okay? So that's where we are with that. Okay. Question. We have a couple of minutes. We have questions.
What questions are on the exam?
I could tell you that if I had made the exam, but I have not made the exam. My guess is it is going to, by necessity, be shorter than the last exam. So there may not be 50 multiple choice, there may be 30 or something like that. Okay. And then there will likely be a relatively similar amount of short answers, so maybe 5 or 6 or something like that. There will be bonus, just like last time. Okay. There we have it.
You're going to make a study guide.
Am I going to make a study guide? So I looked through it again, kind of feel like a lot of the stuff that's on the lecture outline is sufficient. You guys have had the short answer question examples, right? Or will have had them for almost a week. Those are on there. I'm pretty happy with kind of where we are with that. Would you guys, we talked last week about doing a Zoom study session tonight? Yes.
What time will we do that?
That was going to be my next question. So, do you guys want to do 7:30 again? You want to do 8? 8? Okay. So let's say 8 o'clock tonight, I will send out a Zoom link for that. Good.
That's the in, out, and enzyme for us and all that kind of thing.
In and out, yes. Enzymes, no. Okay. Any other questions, guys? Quickly, everybody, okay? If you had your assignment written out and you haven't given it to Sakshi, please do so. If you have it electronically, email it to me now. If you forgot, okay, and you can get it to me today, I will still give you full credit. After today, I'm gonna start taking a point away. Okay, good deal.